Joining me now is Jonathan Turley, constitutional law professor at George Washington University and a Fox Business contributor. And we go back a long time, John. Good to see you again. What do you make of all this?
Thanks, David. Well, the most disappointing aspect to this is the president's relative silence. You know, when there was a false allegation that border agents had flogged migrants on the river's edge down in Texas, the president virtually rushed out to the cameras to announce that they were guilty and would be punished. Here you've got an individual standing in front of the house of a sitting member of the Supreme Court with a Glock and ties and burglary tools and a professed desire to kill the justice. And yet the media largely buried it this weekend on these Sunday shows. And the question is why? I mean, obviously it's a major story. Obviously it has great import for where we are as a nation. But it certainly didn't fit the narrative. You know, this was going to be the January 6th committee hearing week. And you really don't want to be talking about somebody who was motivated from the left, who was out to actually murder a Supreme Court justice.
It's extraordinary. As I said, just this morning, the congressmen at the January 6th committee were talking about respect for the rule of law. I think it's a great thing to mention respect for the rule of law, but specifically the arbiter of the rule of law, the Supreme Court, is one of the three pillars of our republic. And for that group to be in danger is a very, very serious thing. I would put forth more serious than something that happened in the past on January 6th, because that's happening right now.
That's right. I mean, when Chief Justice Marshall said the Supreme Court was the final arbiter of what the law meant, he didn't also mean that you're likely to be the last casualty. I mean, these justices need to feel that their families, let alone themselves, are safe. And yet these protesters, within 24 hours of an alleged attempted murder of Justice Kavanaugh, showed up outside the home of Amy Coney Barrett, Justice Barrett. She has 7 children. This is less than a day after her colleague was threatened with murder. And yet there was no sense of restraint or decency or responsibility by these protesters.
It goes beyond that, though. Nancy Pelosi is slow-walking this legislation that is ready to go. I mean, it's ready to be voted on. Essentially, she's slow-walking it. This legislation would add more protection for the Supreme Court justices and other judges and, of course, their staff. Why do you think she's doing that?
Well, I mean, the problem is that you can't cover this story and you can't pass this legislation without dealing with a problem that has a number of contributors, including many in the Democratic Party. For 2 years, they have attacked this institution. And it's not surprising that some people have turned that into an attack of the justices on this institution. And, you know, you're talking about members that have not just been packing the court, but you even have the Senate Majority Leader who stood in front of the Supreme Court and threatened Justice Kavanaugh and Gorsuch by name, that they were going to face some type of consequence if they didn't vote the way he wanted them to vote. Well, how do you think that is heard by people like this young man who's obviously quite disturbed?
Indeed. I think there's a direct connection. And then, of course, there's also the unwillingness to enforce a law that is on the books that we've all talked about now for weeks, that prevents any kind of protest in or near the home of a judge or a justice. The A.G. Garland, our Attorney General, is not enforcing the law. Why is that?
Well, in fairness to Attorney General Garland, there is a significant free speech issue there, a First Amendment challenge. That law would likely be narrowly construed by the court. It talks about protesting for the purpose of influencing an ongoing proceeding. There's obviously an opinion that hasn't been made final, but if you read that too broadly, it would allow you to arrest people at the Supreme Court itself, which is also covered under the language. I think the primary failure here is with the president himself. That is, he needed to go days ago in front of the camera and say that whether this is a crime or not, it's wrong. And Republicans and Democrats have to stand shoulder to shoulder and to tell these people that what they are doing is a disgrace, it's grotesque, and that none of us support it. but he didn't, and his silence speaks loudly to these extremists.
Well, John, it's not silence. It's the opposite. His press secretary, no longer there, but she wasn't negated by anything that he said, suggested that they should protest. And there are other members of Congress suggesting that they should protest despite that law. And I would argue with you a bit. The law, as far as I know, has never been challenged by the Supreme Court for obstructing the First Amendment, has it? I mean, this is a law where they put obstruction of justice above the concerns of protesters who want to be in a specific place at a particular time.
Yeah, I think that a fairly formidable challenge could be made if they tried to arrest these protesters. I would not bet on those charges withstanding judicial review. We haven't had, as you noted, this type of direct challenge. But I think that the Justice Department is less than confident they could make this one stick in the long run.
You know, it's interesting how lawmakers are hedging their bets. There is a moderate Democrat, Congressman Coons, who was on Fox News Sunday on yesterday talking about this. I just want to play the tape and get your reaction to it. Roll tape.
Okay, so don't arrest the protesters based on that title. I got it. That's what you're saying. The president said this.
Brad, let's be clear. I didn't say don't arrest protesters. I'm simply saying that all appropriate action should be taken to ensure the safety of Supreme Court justices. And I'm not going to say this protester or that protester ought to be arrested. I just think that that's a judgment call to be made by law enforcement, not by a senator on a Sunday show.
So you see how they're hedging their bets on that issue. In particular, as you mentioned, there are some questions about it, but isn't there somebody out there that would have the authority, particularly in light of an assassination attempt, a Supreme Court justice, to protect the judges and the justices even more and adhere to the edict of that particular law, that federal statute?
Well, that's why it's so alarming that Speaker Pelosi has delayed this legislation in the House. I mean, putting aside the fact that she insists that there's no risk to these justices, which is rather questionable at best, but what she conveys with this slow walking of the legislation is that this is not a big deal, that this is not an urgent matter. You would think that the House of Representatives would want to join the Senate in quickly passing this law to say that we don't approve of this and that we are going to stand with these justices regardless of how they interpret the Constitution. But she has sent the opposite message. She's basically offered a shrug rather than concern for these justices.
And that is a great concern. Jonathan Turley, good to see you. Thank you very much for being here. Appreciate it.